What if everything you were ever taught about reincarnation is wrong? Not wrong in a small way. Wrong in the way that changes how you look at your own death, tonight, right now, before you even finish this sentence. You've probably heard it 100 times, in 100 different forms. You die, you rest, you come back. New body, new lessons, another shot at getting it right. It sounds fair. It sounds almost gentle. Like the universe is patient with you, like it wants you to succeed eventually, like it's rooting for you. But there's an older teaching, attributed to Mary Magdalene, buried for almost 2,000 years, recovered by accident from the Egyptian desert in the sand where it had been hidden, deliberately, by people who understood exactly what it could do to a mind that read it closely. And it says something that will sit in your chest long after this video ends, something you won't be able to fully shake off even if you try. It says the wheel of reincarnation was never a classroom. It was never even neutral. It was never designed with your well-being anywhere in its blueprint. It was built, on purpose, by rulers called the Archons, beings whose entire function is to keep the wheel turning, life after life, generation after generation, without you ever once asking why. And the light you're supposed to walk toward when you die, the warm, welcoming light people describe after near-death experiences, the one that shows up in nearly every culture's death mythology, might not be rescue at all. It might be the last stage of the machine, closing gently around you. I'm going to walk you through Mary Magdalene's teaching exactly as it survives in the texts. Who the Archons actually are, by name and by function. What they do to a soul the moment it leaves the body. Why forgetting isn't an accident, but an engineered outcome. And why some of the oldest mystics on earth taught their students not to walk toward the light without knowing exactly what it was first. Stay with me through this one. It gets specific fast, and it gets strange, and by the end, I don't think you'll think about death the same way again. You probably know her as a follower of Jesus. Maybe a reformed sinner, depending on which sermon you grew up hearing, which painting you saw first, which version got handed down to you without anyone ever questioning where it actually came from. That version of her is small. It's flattened. It's been sanded down for centuries into something manageable, something safe, something that doesn't threaten anything. And I don't think that happened by accident. In the Gnostic tradition, Gnostic meaning knowledge-based, an early current of Christian and Jewish mysticism built around direct inner experience rather than obedience to institutions, one that flourished quietly in Egypt and the Eastern Mediterranean in the first few centuries after Christ. Mary Magdalene isn't a footnote. She's called apostle to the apostles, the one who understood something the other disciples couldn't hold on to, couldn't process, couldn't sit with. In these texts, she's the one pulled aside for private teaching, again and again, because the crowd wasn't ready for it, and frankly, neither were most of the men standing closest to her. There's a document called the Gospel of Mary, Coptic from Egypt, the surviving copy dated to around the 5th century, though the material inside it is almost certainly far older, likely circulating in some form as early as the 2nd century. It surfaced in 1896, near Akhmim, pulled out of the sand by an antiquities dealer who had no real idea what he was holding in his hands. It never made it into the Bible. Not because it lacked age. Not because it lacked credibility compared to what did make the cut. It was left out because of exactly what it teaches, and what it implies about who gets to define the afterlife. Here's my honest read on that, and I'll say it plainly because I think it matters. A teaching about escaping a system rarely survives being curated by the very system it's warning you about. That's not cynicism. That's just how institutions behave, every single time, throughout history. What Mary Magdalene is remembered for isn't a moral checklist, isn't a list of sins to avoid. It's a map, a detailed, specific map of what actually happens to the soul the second the body stops working. And her map doesn't look anything like the one most people are carrying around in their heads today, the soft one, the comfortable one. Everything I'm about to walk you through traces back to her, directly, not loosely, not by association. Keep her name in your head as we go, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why the people closest to her were unsettled by what she knew, and why some of them, according to these same texts, didn't want her speaking at all. Picture a small room. Low ceiling, mud brick walls, somewhere just outside Jerusalem, in the uneasy years right after the crucifixion, when nobody quite knew what was supposed to happen next. The public teachings are over. The crowds have gone home, frightened, uncertain, looking over their shoulders. Most of the disciples have scattered, but a handful remain in that room. And Mary Magdalene is speaking to them quietly, almost in a whisper, because what she's saying isn't meant for the street, isn't meant for the temple courts, isn't meant for anyone who hasn't earned the right to hear it. The oil lamps are burning low, casting long shadows against the walls. Someone's hands are shaking, and it isn't from the cold outside. She isn't comforting them. That's the part that gets me every single time I sit with this scene, the part one keep coming back to. She isn't saying, "Don't be afraid of death," the way you'd expect from someone trying to soothe a grieving room. She's saying the opposite. She's telling them to be alert at death, that the soul, once it leaves the body, doesn't rise freely into peace the way they'd been led to assume. It has to pass through something. Powers. Layers, stacked one on top of another. Rulers who ask questions at each threshold, who try to claim what was never actually theirs to claim in the first place. And she gives them the instruction that everything else in this video hangs on, the line that this entire teaching orbits around. Know what you are, before you're asked what you are. That's not a bedtime teaching, meant to send a grieving room off to sleep easier. That's a survival briefing, delivered in a whisper, in a room with the door closed. And it's the exact seed of the doctrine you're about to hear in full, expanded, named, and mapped out piece by piece. Let's talk about the version of reincarnation you already believe, even if you've never said it out loud, even if you've never really examined it closely. You die. You rest. You come back into a new life, carrying invisible lessons from the last one, forgetting the details but somehow keeping the growth. Eventually, after enough loops, enough lifetimes, your soul graduates. It ascends. It's a comforting story, and I understand why it's comforting. It turns death into a curriculum instead of an ending, and it takes a lot of the sting out of watching someone you love disappear. Mary Magdalene's teaching rejects that framing completely. Not softly, not with some gentle caveat attached. Completely. In her teaching, and in the wider Gnostic texts that echo it and expand on it, reincarnation isn't growth at all. It's maintenance. Not yours. The system's. You are not a student in this story, working your way toward a diploma. You are closer to fuel, a resource cycled through a structure that was built by something else, engineered for something else's benefit, something that has no particular interest in whether you learn anything at all. Ask yourself the question almost nobody asks about the soul curriculum version of reincarnation. Who built the curriculum in the first place? Who wrote the syllabus? And more importantly, who benefits from you staying enrolled in it, semester after semester, forever, with no actual graduation date ever specified? A real curriculum has an end point. A real teacher wants the student to eventually walk out of the classroom and never come back, because the whole point was for them to leave. But the system Mary Magdalene describes in her teaching doesn't want you to leave. It wants you circulating, indefinitely, quietly, without complaint. And once you understand exactly how it's built to accomplish that, you'll never hear the phrase, old soul, tossed around casually the same way again. So who's actually running this? Not vaguely, not symbolically. Let's name it precisely the way she did. According to the texts recovered near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in 1945, 52 ancient manuscripts sealed inside a clay jar and buried for roughly 16 centuries, one of the most significant religious discoveries of the last 100 years, unearthed by a farmer digging for fertilizer who had no idea what he'd stumbled onto. This physical world was not made by the true, ultimate source of everything. It was made by a lesser being. The texts name him Yaldabaoth. Here's the actual origin story because it matters, and because vague explanations don't do it justice. In this cosmology, there's a divine being called Sophia, wisdom itself, one of the emanations flowing directly from the true, unknowable source above all things. Sophia, acting alone, without her divine counterpart, without permission, attempts an act of creation entirely on her own. The result is flawed, deformed. Yaldabaoth is born from that single mistake, arrogant from the moment he opens his eyes, blind to his own origin, utterly convinced he is the only God in existence because there's no one immediately visible above him to correct that assumption. He looks out at the emptiness, sees no one, and declares himself supreme. That declaration is the founding lie underneath this entire reality. The crack in the foundation everything else is built on top of. Yaldabaoth then constructs a world to rule over, and he doesn't do it alone. He generates subordinates to help him manage it. The texts call them Archons. The word literally means rulers or authorities in Greek, and in the Apocryphon of John, one of the most detailed texts recovered at Nag Hammadi, they're named specifically, not left as some abstract force. Yao, Sabaoth, Adonaios, Eleos, Astapheos, Horeos, and Yaldabaoth himself at the head of them, 7 in total, each one assigned to govern a planetary sphere, Saturn, Mars, Venus, and so on. Each ring of the visible sky in this teaching isn't just a rock spinning in space. It's a checkpoint, staffed, active, with a specific job to perform. Their job isn't cruelty for its own sake, and I want to be precise about that instead of leaving it vague. It's containment, executed with administrative precision. The Apocryphon of John describes each archon governing a specific human faculty as the body is being formed. One governs bone, one governs sinew, one governs the passions, one governs desire, another governs grief, another ambition, another fear, so that between the 7 of them, a human being's entire physical and emotional architecture is already assembled, piece, by committee, before that person ever draws a single conscious breath. You are, in this teaching, not born a blank slate. You are born pre-wired, and every wire has an owner who installed it. This is precisely what Mary Magdalene warned her circle about in that low room, and she wasn't speaking in vague terms about generalized evil. She was describing a structure, named, ranked, specific, with a chain of command, and she taught that a soul rising after death has to pass through every one of those 7 rulers, one at a time, in strict order, and that each one has the authority to stop it. That's not folklore dressed up as spirituality. That's an operating manual for what happens after your heart stops. Let's walk through exactly how it processes you, step by step. Here's where Mary Magdalene's teaching gets mechanically specific, and this is the part that changes how you think about death completely, because it stops being abstract and starts being a procedure. When the body dies, the soul doesn't float freely upward into light the way modern spirituality tends to describe it. It rises, sphere by sphere, through the 7 planetary rings, and at each one, the ruling archon stops it and interrogates it. This isn't symbolic questioning, some poetic metaphor for self-reflection. Later Gnostic and related esoteric traditions describe it almost like a customs checkpoint, sometimes called the toll houses, where the soul is required to answer for itself, specifically, before it's permitted to pass upward to the next ring. But it isn't judged the way you'd expect from a moral courtroom. Good deeds weighed against bad ones on some cosmic scale. It's evaluated for something else entirely, what the texts call the divine spark. A fragment of the true, higher source, sealed inside every human being at birth, trapped inside matter the way a burning coal is trapped inside a heap of ash. That spark is the actual object of interest at every checkpoint. Not your morality, your light. What you did with your life matters far less, in this teaching, than what you're carrying inside you. At the 7th sphere, the outermost ring, governed by Yaldabaoth himself, the highest authority in the chain, the soul that hasn't achieved Gnosis, that hasn't earned genuine recognition of its own origin, is turned back. Not punished in the dramatic sense. Redirected, procedurally, the way a form gets sent back for missing a signature. Sent down through the same 7 rings in reverse order, gathering the specific weight of each archon's domain on the way down. Desire loaded on at one sphere, grief loaded on at another, ambition at a third, until it arrives fully reclothed in exactly the material it needs to function inside a brand new body. Mary Magdalene called this the garment of forgetting in her teaching to her small circle, a new layer added at every single checkpoint, until the soul arrives in its next life already dressed, head to toe, in the precise confusion the system requires to keep functioning. This is reincarnation, in her teaching, stripped of the comforting language. Not evolution. Redeployment. The spark goes back down into a fresh body, generates more of itself through another entire lifetime of longing and searching and reaching for something it can't quite name, and the system draws from that supply indefinitely, harvest after harvest, without end. You are not the customer in this arrangement, the one being served. You are the crop being grown, cycle after cycle, season after season. And there's one more piece to this mechanism, arguably the most important piece, the part that makes it almost impossible to notice from inside your own life. This is, in my opinion, the single most disturbing piece of Mary Magdalene's teaching, and it's also the most precise, the most mechanical, the least symbolic of everything covered so far. At the checkpoints, before the soul is sent back down for another cycle, the Archons attach something to it. The Apocryphon of John names it directly, the counterfeit spirit. Not a demon riding alongside you in some cartoonish way. Something closer to a false operating system, fused directly onto the real soul, built to imitate your own inner voice closely enough that you genuinely cannot tell where you end and it begins. It's the voice whispering, "That's just how I am. Every single time you repeat a pattern you already know, somewhere deep down, isn't actually you. It's not offered as a metaphor in this teaching. It's described as a literal attachment, installed at the border on the way back down, running quietly in the background for your entire lifetime, without you ever once suspecting there are two voices in the room instead of one, negotiating over which one gets to speak. Then comes the cup. In several strands of this tradition, it's called the cup of forgetting, or the water of oblivion, and drinking it isn't punishment the way a prison sentence is punishment, handed down for something you did wrong. It's structural, built directly into the design on purpose, from the very beginning, as a load-bearing part of the entire mechanism. The moment the soul drinks, it forgets everything, not just the events and faces of the last life, but the deeper truth of what it actually is underneath all of it. That it was ever anything more than this one small, mortal identity, wandering around confused for 70 or 80 years, wondering why it feels like it's constantly missing something it can't name or point to. Mary Magdalene taught her circle to watch for the fingerprints of exactly this mechanism while still alive, while there was still time to notice. The déjà vu that hits too hard, too specifically, to be dismissed as coincidence. The persistent ache of feeling like you're forgetting something important, always sitting just out of reach, no matter how hard you try to grasp it. The counterfeit spirit's voice, dressed up convincingly as your own private thoughts, steering you gently back towards smallness every single time you start getting close to remembering something larger. The cup doesn't need to be cruel to be effective, and I think that's actually the most unsettling part of the whole design. A soul that remembers what it truly is stops being useful to the harvest immediately. So the harvest simply makes sure it never remembers, quietly, efficiently, without drama, every single cycle, without fail, generation after generation. Which brings us to the final piece of the trap, the one almost nobody talks about, because it's disguised so convincingly as the good part, the happy ending, the thing you're supposed to want. You've heard the near-death experience stories. Almost everyone has, whether from a book, a documentary, or someone in their own family. People clinically die, get resuscitated, and describe the same sequence, remarkably consistently across cultures and continents, floating above the body, moving through a tunnel, and at the end of it, a light. Warm, familiar, welcoming, something that feels unmistakably like home, like arrival, like relief after a long and difficult journey. I'm not making medical claims about that experience here, and I want to be clear about that. I'm not telling you it isn't real for the people who describe it, or dismissing what they went through. What I'm giving you is Mary Magdalene's teaching about it specifically, and in her framework, that light at the end of the tunnel is the seventh Archon's threshold. The final checkpoint in the entire chain, dressed up, carefully, as an arrival instead of what it actually is. Think about the mechanism from the inside for a second, the way she seemed to want her circle to think about it. A system that needs the soul to willingly re-enter the cycle can't rely on force to get the job done efficiently. Force creates resistance, and a soul that resists becomes much harder to process cleanly. The far more efficient method, the one that actually scales across billions of souls without friction, is invitation. Make the exit look exactly like the thing the soul has been longing for its entire life. Make the trap feel like being welcomed home by someone who missed you. Mary Magdalene's teaching to her circle was blunt about this, according to the surviving fragments. She told them plainly, don't walk toward the light purely out of instinct, the way your fear or your longing will push you to. Look at it first. Know it before you enter it. Because the most convincing trap was never going to look threatening. Nobody walks eagerly towards something that looks dangerous or wrong. But something warm, something that feels like relief after a long, hard road. That a soul walks into without a second thought, without hesitation, gratefully. This is the exact discernment she was training her circle for in that low room. The night the lamps burned down low, and nobody in the room was fully at ease. Not fear of death itself. Precision at the moment of death. Knowing the difference between the true source and a well-built imitation of it, standing at the door, fully lit, looking exactly like home. So if the light isn't automatically safety, in her teaching, what actually is? This is the part of Mary Magdalene's teaching that stops it from being pure dread, the part that turns this from a horror story into an actual path. Because in her doctrine, there is a way through the entire seven-sphere mechanism, and it was never about outrunning the Archons physically, or memorizing some secret password to recite at each checkpoint like a magic spell. It's called Gnosis, and the word deserves real precision here, because it gets used loosely in spiritual spaces now, stripped of what it originally meant. Gnosis isn't information you memorize from a book or a video. It isn't a belief you simply agree to on faith. It's direct, lived, interior recognition, the difference between reading a detailed description of water and actually being soaked in it, dripping, changed by the contact. Mary Magdalene's teaching states this directly, without much room for interpretation. The way past Yaldabaoth's entire system isn't fighting the Archons at their own checkpoints, on their own terms, using their own rules. You don't out-argue a border guard whose entire function, whose entire reason for existing, is processing you according to a script. The way past them is recognizing fully, before you ever arrive at that border, that you were never truly their subject to begin with. The divine spark inside you isn't something the system generously loans you fresh each lifetime, out of some kind of cosmic generosity. It's something the system has been quietly borrowing from you, cycle after cycle, harvest after harvest, without your knowledge or your consent. A soul that holds that recognition fully, completely, in its bones and not just in its thoughts, doesn't get cataloged cleanly by a counterfeit spirit, because the counterfeit spirit's entire function depends on the soul never noticing there's a difference between the two voices sharing its head in the first place. And a soul carrying that recognition in Mary Magdalene's teaching is the one capable of standing at the seventh threshold, looking directly at the welcoming light without flinching, and seeing it clearly for exactly what it is, instead of being pulled into it automatically, out of habit, out of longing, out of exhaustion. I hold this the way I believe Mary Magdalene intended it to be held, not as a guaranteed technique you perform once and forget, not as a magic formula with a checklist attached, but as a discipline, a way of living awake day after day, so that the one moment almost nobody in this life is prepared for doesn't catch you unprepared either, the way it seemed to catch so many of the people around her. That is the actual center of her teaching, when you strip away everything else surrounding it. Not fear of the Archons, clarity large enough to see straight past them. So here's what I want you to actually carry out of this video, more than any single fact or name I've given you tonight. Mary Magdalene never framed any of this as fate, as something fixed and unavoidable that you simply have to accept. She framed it as a mechanism, named, structured, specific, with parts you can actually point to and understand. And a mechanism, once you can see its shape clearly, once you understand how each piece connects to the next, stops moving you through it unconsciously the way it did before you knew what you were looking at. You don't have to accept every single detail exactly the way I've laid it out tonight, sphere by sphere, name by name. But I'd ask you to sit with the center of it honestly without rushing past it. That forgetting isn't always innocent. That comfort isn't always safety, no matter how warm it feels. That the most effective trap in existence was never going to look like one from the inside. It was going to look like exactly what you'd been hoping to find your whole life, waiting for you with open arms. Her teaching, buried in the sand for almost 2,000 years before anyone read it again, wasn't given to frighten her small circle into obedience or fear. It was given as a map carefully drawn, so that at the one moment in existence when almost everyone walks through half asleep, they wouldn't have to. Stay awake. That was always Mary Magdalene's real teaching, whispered in that low room, meant to outlast every attempt to bury it. Now let me step outside the script for a moment and speak to you directly. YouTube has entirely stripped monetization from this channel. I'm not going to dull the message to earn it back. I won't tone anything down to keep advertisers comfortable. They were never at ease with this truth to begin with. If anything, it makes me dig in harder. But I cannot keep doing this alone. I need people like you behind me to keep this work alive. If something in this video actually landed for you, actually shifted something, click the link in the description, also in the pinned comment, and join me on Patreon. Inside, you'll get immediate access to raw, unfiltered members-only videos, private audio sessions, and the deeper esoteric material this platform refuses to let me publish. Most people need permission to act. The Archons built a whole system on that hesitation. You don't.